Have you been wondering how AI might transform your software projects? Let me show you how you can integrate AI into every aspect of your workflows. If you're like me, you love creating software, but you probably also find that a lot of the things you do on a software project slow you down, and they're not very interesting and kind of routine. Take documentation, for example. Planning and documenting. It's necessary, but you probably don't enjoy it. And although these parts are more fun than creating documents, you'd probably rather not spend most of your time handcrafting stuff like this either. You want to get them done as fast as possible and get on with the work you enjoy. But how? Well, by doing what we've already been doing for years, automate, but using AI to take us to the next level. I've integrated AI into almost every task I do as an engineer, and I'm continuing to find ways to integrate it more and more. I'm going to show you how I'm using AI to make my projects faster and more fun. I'm going to do this by starting with an idea for a new app, and then moving step by step through each activity and task, showing you what AI tools I'm using and how I'm using them. I'm also going to share some tips I've learned along the way, like why I'm using a certain tool or a lesson I've learned for using it, and so forth. We're going to build a web app that lets users pull and view files from a GitHub repository. The users can provide file name extensions to filter and limit the retrieved files. They can also apply syntax highlighting to the displayed code. We'll name our app GitHub Repository Viewer. And here's how we're going to get there. We're going to create a rough plan for our project, draft our requirements, a high-level design, and document it all, using AI throughout the process to make it all lightning quick and painless. We'll even use AI to generate our user stories. We'll then use a simple AI app that will ingest our project documentation we've created and let us do Q&A against its contents. Finally, we're going to code the app, test it, and create a project README, all using AI to handle the boring parts and slash the time required to create the app. I think you get it, so let's get on with it. All right, so we have our Confluence Wiki open, and we have our project plan page open for edit, and I have ChatGPT open in the sidebar of the browser. And I've pasted one of my pre-created prompts for ChatGPT to help us get started and quickly knock out the project plan documentation. So here I've given it a bit of information on our project, and I've also asked it to generate a Confluence page. It's really important that you pay attention to the formatting so that you have less work. So I've told it to format it as a wiki page for me. So here we go. ChatGPT generated a Confluence page in the correct wiki format based on the instructions I gave it, and it laid out some milestones for us, and it's formatted it nicely, and I looked it over and it looks pretty cool. So as a first start, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this, and we have a formatted wiki page capturing our project plan. All right, let's get on with generating some requirements documentation. So here I am, still in the same chat session with ChatGPT, but I moved on to the requirements page. And I've given ChatGPT some additional information about our requirements, and I've asked it to format the page as a wiki page. So we're going to end up with some content we can just paste right into our requirements page. ChatGPT generated a Confluence formatted requirements page for us. It laid out some of our input requirements for the application, and it then gave us some functional requirements for the application does, some additional requirements for the UI, and some assumptions we're making. So I reviewed it. It looks pretty good to me. I'm going to basically copy paste this into our requirements page and move on with our next task. ChatGPT can also help us create user stories. So here I'm in my Jira board, and I have asked ChatGPT to use the project plan and the requirements so far, create 3 Jira stories, include the title, and no more than 3 acceptance criteria for each story. ChatGPT generated our 3 user stories per our requirements. We have user story 1 with a title, acceptance criteria. User story 2, same. User story 3, I'm just going to select the first user story, and I'm going to create our first JIRA ticket. And I'm simply pasting in the title and the acceptance criteria exactly as ChatGPT generated it. All right, next up is high-level design. So now I'm back in our Confluence space on the design page, and I have it open for edit. And I have ChatGPT in the same chat session, so it has all the same context, the project plan, the requirements, everything that we've communicated to it so far. And I'm asking it to recommend a high-level design for our app. Then I give it some guidance, some criteria, some of the technologies we want to use, but it's not very verbose at all. And I'm asking it again to format it as a Confluence page. So I did a quick review of what ChatGPT generated for our design, and it looks pretty good to me. And I am going to copy and paste this right into our design page. And one thing I want to call your attention to, after generating the design documentation, at the end, ChatGPT on its own offers up a prompt that we can use to then go back into ChatGPT and generate a sequence diagram to show the interactions of our components. So I'm back in ChatGPT in my sidebar for my browser, but I'm going to go to a custom GPT called Diagram Genius for this. Now, if you don't know what a custom GPT is, look for a link in the description for this video. Okay, here we are in Diagram Genius, and I pasted the prompt that ChatGPT generated for us. Generate a simple sequence diagram in JPEG format, and then it describes our application and the components. And then it's generating an image for us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually download this image and insert it into our design page. Now that's the way to generate diagrams. So what we're going to do last is we're going to generate a start for an FAQ. So right now I'm back in ChatGPT, not the custom GPT for creating diagrams. So now I'm going to say, hey, use the information to generate 3 useful FAQs specific to our project, formatted as a Confluence page titled FAQs, and use only the context of our project. Okay, ChatGPT generated 3 FAQs. I looked them over, they look great. And the first one is, how do I use the GitHub repository viewer, the application that we're going to create? And just based on the information we've given it and the requirements and the design, it already knows how to answer this. I'm going to go ahead and generate our first 3 FAQs, paste it right into our FAQ page. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just question and answer with our documentation, not have to go and search the documentation and read through it to find the answer to every question? Well, using an AI technique known as Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG for short, we can do just that. Now, if you're not familiar with Retrieval Augmented Generation, you can see the link to a description of the technique in the video's description. So let's go ahead and ingest our Confluence space. Okay, the documentation is there. Now, give me a 2-sentence summary of the GitHub Code Reviewer project. Let's get the answer. Now we're going to the large language model. All right, GitHub Code Reviewer project aims to develop a web application. That looks perfect. And you'll also notice that there are links provided to the documents that were used to answer the question. And we can link directly to that, or we can click on it and go right to the page to verify the answers. All right, finally we can get to the good stuff, the code. So again, I'm back in the same ChatGPT session we've been using all along. So ChatGPT is very aware of our requirements and our design. So all I really need to do is say, help me get the project started by suggesting some scripts and classes, separate the UI code from the backend logic. So using the project information, the design information, ChatGPT has offered up a few classes for us to get us started. It separated them into 3 different classes here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to copy these classes as is into the code editor, and then we'll resume. I've opened Visual Studio Code, and I've created the initial set of classes exactly as ChatGPT recommended them to us. And on the right-hand side, I have a panel open with GitHub Copilot. So if you're not familiar with Copilot, it's a coding assistant, one of many that are available as extensions for various IDEs, including VS Code. So in the chat window for Copilot, I'm going to ask it to help us create and activate a new virtual environment for our project. Copilot gives us 2 commands, one to create the virtual environment, one to activate it. So one of the neat features with Copilot is instead of copying and pasting these commands into my terminal, I can just ask it to insert it directly into my terminal. I'm going to do that and execute these commands. And now we have a virtual environment created and activated. Now almost every project is going to have some external library dependencies. For ours, we have a dependency on Streamlit and on the request library. So what we're going to do is ask Copilot to give us instructions to install these 2 library dependencies. It gives us our commands for installing Streamlit and requests. Again, I'm just going to insert directly into terminal and execute. Since Copilot is being so helpful to us, I'm going to go ahead and ask it to give us the command to run our app on port 8888. Again, gives us a command, and again, we're just going to use the handy insert into terminal feature and fire up our app. And here's our first code of our application. I've gone ahead and filled in a few of the fields with my GitHub username, the name of the repository that we're going to fetch files from. By the way, this is the code base for the same retrieval augmented generation app we used earlier. I'm asking it to filter by .py. I've provided my personal access token for GitHub, and I'm asking it to use Python as syntax highlighting. Let's fetch the files. Okay, so we've got our first bug. Let's go back to the editor and see if GitHub Copilot can help us debug this thing and fix it. All right, so based on the error that we got, I narrowed down the source to this section of code in our GitHub API connector. This is where we're actually fetching the content for a given file. So the main app iterates through all of the files that match the .py extension and then calls this to retrieve the response and return it. So what I'm going to do is we're going to attach the debugger, and we're going to see what the response actually looks like. And I'm going to submit the same request I did before. And we're here in the debugger in the main app. I'm going to go ahead and continue, and we'll take a look at one of the responses. So this is going to be the response for one of the file contents that we received. So we can see here, this is the content of this. This is actually the source code. So we can see that what we need to do is fetch the content value from the response. However, down here, the code is trying to convert this to JSON. Well, that's not going to work, and that's the source of our error. All right, so we found out from the debugger that we do not want to convert this to JSON. What we really want to do is just return the content as is. So what I'm going to do here is highlight this section. I'm going to right-click, select Copilot, GitHub Copilot, our AI coding assistant, and start inline chat. Now it has the context of this section of code. And I'm going to say, don't convert this to JSON, just return the content and encoding attributes of the response object. So it's going to return the content, the text as is, along with the encoding it's going to extract from the response. All right, so now it's returning the content and the encoding that it extracted from the response object. We'll accept that. Okay, code's been modified. All right, we're going to relaunch and run this again. Okay, I relaunched the app and we still have the debugger attached, so I'm going to go ahead and re-execute the same request to fetch these Python files from our repo. Now back in our debugger, let's kind of go through here and take a look at our files now. Okay, so now let's see. All right, so I got to the actual source code back in text form. Now what we're going to do is going to try to call the code formatter decoder to decode this to UTF-8 format. So let's step into that code formatter and see what we have. So we have an exception here. Let's see what the exception says. Unsupported encoding. Oh, let's take a look at the decoding code here. So decode content is over in code formatter. Okay, so we saw before that the content that was returned is not base64 encoded. It's just plain text in UTF-8 format. So what I'm going to do is ask Copilot to, again, correct this code. So I'm going to highlight the section. I'm going to right-click Copilot, start inline chat, and I'm going to say the content will not be base64 encoded. I misspelled encoded. So just decode using the given encoded value and return. Okay, so now it's just doing a decode to whatever encoding value or scheme is passed in. We'll accept that and we'll rerun. All right, after having Copilot help us fix 2 bugs in the code that ChatGPT generated, we're going to try this one more time. Let's try to fetch our code, our Python files from our repository. All right, now that's looking good. So we have an app.py file. It looks like syntax highlighting for Python is being done correctly. We have some other Python files. All right, looks like everything is working. So our app is working just fine. However, I've decided that I want to make a couple of minor enhancements to the user interface. For one, I want to take these input variables that you saw on the top of the page, I want to move them into a sidebar and move the actual source code to the right side of the browser. So I'm going to highlight the entire block in the main UI code, and I'm going to right click again. I'm going to Copilot for help, start inline chat, and I'm going to ask it to move the user input fields into a sidebar. All right, first glance, that looks pretty good. I'm going to accept its changes. I'm going to save and we'll relaunch. Looks like the changes that Copilot made are working fine. Now we have our inputs on the left, and let's fetch the files to make sure that nothing broke. All right, great. Everything's still looking good. But there's one last enhancement I want to make before we stop, and that's this. I'd rather not have to hand type in the language for syntax highlighting. I'd rather have a drop-down list I can choose from. So again, I'm highlighting the sidebar that provides the programming language for syntax highlighting. I'm going to ask Copilot to help us again. And I'm going to say, let the user select language for syntax highlighting from a drop-down, and then I provide the language values for it. Okay, it's made the changes. I'm going to accept the changes, save, and relaunch. Nice. Now, instead of having to hand type Python, JavaScript, Markdown, or whatever, we can just select Python from the list and have it use Python syntax highlighting. All right, very good. That's it for our features. For the MVP, I think we're good. Of course, we want unit tests for our app. So just to demonstrate Copilot's capability to generate tests for us, I'm going to highlight this method in the GitHub API connector class. And over in the Copilot chat window, I'm going to type the test command to generate unit tests for us. Generate unit tests for the selected code. Now, the unit test has been generated by Copilot. I can ask it to create a new file for us. Insert in a new file. And we might as well have Copilot tell us how to run this unit test. Give me the command to run this test. Okay, it gives us a command. Again, we're going to take advantage of insert into terminal, run our tests, and ran to test. Okay, coding is not the only type of task that Copilot's great at helping you with. It can also help you to generate various types of files, from Docker files to config files and scripts, and it can also help you generate the all-important README file for your project. So here I'm asking it to generate a README file in Markdown format, and I'm asking it to cover a few topics for me. It's created a README file in Markdown format, and like I did with the unit test, I'll just ask it to create a new file from that. And that looks like it did a pretty good job of starting us off with a README file. I'd like to hear from you. Are you using AI in your work? If so, what challenges are you facing? What successes are you having? What topics would you like to see us explore next? Or maybe you'd like to see us deep dive into some of the topics we touched on in this video. Let me know. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in future videos.